On behalf of the Manatee Chamber of Commerce, I would like to welcome everyone this morning to this very special occasion to honor our local Congressman, Vern Buchanan, with our national U.S. Chamber here as well. So thank you so much for coming. If I can open this morning with a quote from one of the United States of America's greatest presidents, Ronald Reagan. There are no limits to growth because there are no limits to human intelligence, imagination, and wonder. It is a privilege and honor this morning to welcome Congressman Buchanan for this very special award. I am proud to call Congressman Buchanan my friend, and I've worked with him with many clients on important healthcare initiatives and others. What I respect the most about Congressman Buchanan is he is a business person, and he brings that knowledge, passion, and skill on behalf of this district to Washington, to the United States, and to the world. But he's also a very humble man. I've enjoyed getting to know Congressman Buchanan and his lovely wife, Sandy, through our mission together on the Tidewell Hospice Board, and through that organization and the many things that they do for our community, it's been an absolute honor to get to know Vern, Sandy, and his whole family. U.S. Representative Vern Buchanan is co-chair of the bipartisan 29-member Florida Congressional Delegation and Florida's only member of Congress to serve on the powerful House Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction over tax policy, international trade, and health care. Congressman Buchanan is also a member of the House Budget Committee. He is a self-made businessman. He understands America's economic strength flows from its entrepreneurial spirit and pro-growth free market policies. Congressman Buchanan has worked tirelessly to enact tax incentives to help small businesses end burdensome regulations and limit frivolous lawsuits. He grew up with 5 siblings in a blue-collar household in a small town near Detroit, Michigan. He served 6 years in the Armed National Guard and worked his way through college. The self-made businessman is a respected leader in Florida's business community. He has chaired both the Florida Chamber of Commerce and the Sarasota Chamber of Commerce. He was also a member of the board of the U.S. Chamber, and in 2005, he was inducted into the Tampa Bay Business Hall of Fame. And as I mentioned, Congressman Buchanan is a dedicated philanthropist. He has committed himself to diverse community causes, including the Boys and Girls Club, the Community Foundation of Sarasota County, the Walk to Cure Juvenile Diabetes, the American Heart Walk, the Moat Marine Laboratory, and the Ringling Museum of Art. So again, we are incredibly honored to have him. But he does not work alone. He works in partnerships with other public servants' businesses. So with that in mind, I would like to also honor our other elected officials who are here. It was ironic that once I was in Washington working with Congressman Buchanan and a client initiative, and who did I run into but some of these local servants here from our own community at Congressman Buchanan's home. So it's a real demonstration of his reaching down and making a real difference here in our local community. And with that, my congressman and my friend, Vern Buchanan.
What a great young professional, and I know being chair anything, especially a chamber or anything else, takes a lot more work. But let's give him a round of applause. Also, I just want to mention that, obviously I feel at home when I'm at a chamber because we all have the same things. We want to create jobs and opportunities, but these chambers have a big impact in going out and fighting for us on a daily basis. And this is, if it's not absolutely the best chamber in the state, it's got to be at the very top of the top 2 or 3. They've won the Chamber Award 3 times in a row. They won the National Chamber Award. Maybe they'll get that again this year. You need to work on that a little bit more. This is the top chamber right here. But it doesn't just happen. You've got to have an executive that can manage and lead, Bob Bartz. But I want to give Bob Bartz a big round of applause for all he does. And then just quickly, what I want to do is run through some different issues, but at the end of the day, I'll take whatever questions or comments that you've got, get your thoughts. I did interesting over the weekend. my chief of staff sent me something, and they did a poll where you see all these polls. We get crazy about all the polls, but they did a poll for Iowa, New Hampshire, and I think South Carolina, and they're looking at what did they want in the next president. And at the top of the list, number one, was business experience. And that's part of the problem in Washington. We don't have enough business people because business people are more practical. They want to get things done on behalf of the enterprise. Everybody wins. It's too much about politics, and the biggest issue that this sense of anger today is the dysfunction of Washington. It's too much about the next election and not enough about good public policies. So we need more good business people to get involved and engaged, and many of you are, but to the extent that a lot of people don't want to put themselves out there, but for the sake of the country going forward, I agree, because we have too many people that just really have never met a payroll, never been involved in business, and that's what, of course, chambers are all about. A couple of things. Trade. We did pass in terms of the TPA, which Trade Promotion Authority. I spent with Paul Ryan. We were in Asia with many of the partners. We had a chance to meet with them. The new trade agreement we're trying to work on is about, it would include 11, 12 countries, about 40% of the GDP in the world. Not China, but pretty much everybody else. All the countries said the same thing. A lot of them are in Asia, said we need the U.S. to be involved. We're rebalancing to reposition ourselves to some extent there, but we need you involved because you're the counterweight. And they all do business with China, but they don't trust China. That was the essence of what I've got out of there. But it's important because they claim 95% of the marketplace of the future is either now or in the future is outside the U.S. And 1 in 5 jobs, I see our Port Carlos here running the port, 1 in 5 jobs are as a result of trade in Florida. It's a big part. We have 14, 15 ports. It's a big issue. TPP, we're hoping, just had a discussion this week on that up in Washington. We're hoping to get something done ideally by the end of the year. We're supposed to, but it might go into next year, but we feel pretty confident. But there's a lot more work that needs to be done on that. And then the whole thing with TTIP, which is the European piece, it's a little more complicated, but we do think there's an opportunity. There are a lot of people working on it. I've met with some of the prime ministers and our ambassadors in different European countries, and they think it's the right thing, and a lot of our businesses that do business around the world. And the question is really who's going to write the rules of the future? Is China going to write them, or are we going to write them? And we have to be engaged in, but also we have to make sure we do everything we can to create the better environment to help our businesses. Tax code hasn't been dealt with since 1987. There's a lot that's changed in the world in terms of the global economy. It's something we're working on. One thing I'm excited about, not just the committee I'm on, but with Paul Ryan's leadership, I feel confident we're going to get something done. We might get a piece of it done in the next month or two. If we don't, then unfortunately it'll get pushed to 17. But we do need to have tax reform in terms of simplifying the code. The tax today code is 73,000 pages. And we need to simplify the code, bring down rates for people in general, especially for small business. And I'll say to you that the tax extenders, what they have, not to be too technical, but tax extenders, there's 55 of them. It counts for about $1 trillion. So, and you say, well, if we made a lot of those adjustments, we can bring everybody's rate down. That's what I'd like to get, is a flatter, fair, simpler code. That's what we're pushing. We did get close on some things about a year or two ago under Dave Camp's leadership. He was chairman of Ways and Means. But there were some aspects of it that I didn't like, and we ended up not doing it. But we're going to come back at it. We want to simplify the code, make it a lot easier, maybe like 3 different tax, like 5, 10, and 5, 15, and 25, or something like that. I don't know, but we'd like to get your input and your thoughts on it, so we're working on that. The other big thing is that you hear a lot of, and I touched on earlier, is about dysfunction in Washington. There's no question, and that's part of the reason our delegation, we're the 3rd largest delegation in the country, Florida is, but it was, we didn't work together. We didn't do much together. It didn't used to be that way, but that's the way it's been before the last 3 or 4 years. But I ended up, they asked me, it wasn't something I was looking to do, but they'd asked me if I would chair it. And if you have the majority of the members Republicans, you're automatically, they select someone on our side. We have 17 out of the 27 and 2 senators. So we get a chance to chair it. But I took a different approach, which has not been done before in the delegation. I said, no, let the Democrats pick a chairman, and we'll work together as a co-chair. So I work with Elsie Hastings. But we've been able to do quite a few things together on a bipartisan basis. A lot of people don't like the C word, compromise, but you can't. I've done hundreds of business deals. If you don't compromise, you're not willing to have some give and take, you're not going to get anything done. And that's really what's happening in Washington. But as a result of our effort, we were able to deal with flood insurance, which was huge. You remember about 3-4 years ago where the insurance had gone up sometimes 500%. Veterans health care was a big bipartisan effort. We were able to push through on both sides, as well as citrus greening, which was a big issue. We got $250 million, $125 million committed with the idea we can go back and get more if we needed more. So these were things that were Florida-based. And, of course, flood insurance is some other states. But by working together on a bipartisan basis, we're able to move some things forward, and that's the idea. Every survey, everything I've looked at is always the talk about jobs. Everybody wants to, what more can we be doing to create jobs? I can tell you, when I was in China, met with the vice premier and the minister of finance over there, separate meetings, they both said the same thing. Our goal, the top of our list, creating 20 million new jobs. I thought, well, maybe just one person said, that's his opinion. But when you see that in different meetings, separately, they're focused. That's what they've been averaging. That's what their goal is going forward. And I thought to myself when I walked out, especially out of the second meeting, I said, they got a better business plan than we got. They got a better vision than we got. Because if we were focused on creating more jobs, we'd create a better environment for everybody in this room to do business. And that's the mindset that we have, that we should be. And I've taken the initiative with a couple of my different bills, was to trying to figure out a way to reduce taxes, reduce frivolous lawsuits, reduce regulation, do everything we can to help startups. I introduced a bill where usually you can only write, if you start up a company, about $5,000. We've raised that up to about $20,000, $15,000 to $20,000. So we're getting a lot of sponsors on that. But the more we can do to help with startup companies and everything else. And I'll mention to it a little while back, someone mentioned to me, said, Vern, why are you meeting with like 10, 12 women, CEOs, small and large, medium size from our region? And I said, well, I read something that 57% of the startups going forward in the next 10 years, 57% will be women-led. So the more that we can encourage more startups, we actually have, I think last year, more businesses closing than opening, the first time in the history of our country. So we need to encourage startups. We need to encourage entrepreneurship. And I think back, my wife and I got married in 1976, almost 40 years. It's crazy to think that. But we started our own company with $1,500. And we built it up and created almost 3,000 jobs. Sold it and moved to Florida in 1990. And then we got in another business and started that up and created over 1,000 jobs. But that's what startups are. When you think about it, I got my iWatch on here. When you think about Stephen Jobs starting in his garage, that's America, where they create hundreds of thousands of jobs. Now, all that being said, most of the businesses in America are 2 employees to 15 employees. That's who we are. But we need to do everything we can to help those businesses be more successful. You can't get the jobs. It's one thing a lot of unions don't understand up north. You can't get the jobs unless you have successful businesses, from that standpoint. The other thing I'll just kind of say in closing, and I touched on a little bit, is that, when I see these surveys about, people not believing in the American dream, and I think about younger people don't think that they're going to do as well as their parents, I really, it's really disappointing to me personally, because I just believe in that. I think America's about opportunities. It's not about a free lunch. If someone needs a hand, we need to help them. But at the end of the day, it's about people being able to develop and grow and realize their full potential as a person. Nobody, I always think about when everybody plays cards or whatever, you get dealt a hand of cards in life, you make the best out of your hand. You don't pick your parents and others, but we should try to maximize that potential. I was in downtown Bradenton, and and they were talking about children as the Boys and Girls Club. And they said children make up 25% of the population, but 100% of the future. And that's what we need to be doing, is helping everybody realize their full potential. Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to visit, and I'll take any questions you have. Thank you, and God bless. Carlos, I'm sure you got a question or a comment.
Vern, recently, speaking of surveys, I read where 57% of the U.S. population would support a 10% or 10-cent gas tax increase if it goes into roads. Do you see any hope for a long-term resolution to the transportation network that we're...
I'll tell you, I was on transportation for 4 years, and that was 4 years ago. It was a big issue then. It's still a huge issue, but it goes back 20 years. We need more money, especially in Florida, but a lot of other states have a lot of challenges. It's kind of funny because I did a town hall on Saturday, and a guy stood up in the room, and he said, Vern, he said exactly what you said. He said, nobody would care with gas now but $2.10 a gallon. Add another 10 or 15 cents to the tax. He said, I'm sure we need it. It's something that needs to be dealt with, and I'm sure everybody in the room would support it. So I said in that room, I was up in Manatee County, I said in that room, I said, how many, he said everybody will support it, how many are open to a 10 or 15 cents gas tax? And about 5 hands went up. And everybody else in the room didn't like it. So unfortunately, if it went to the House floor, it would pass. But there's so many Republicans and others that are just kind of an anti-tax, and that's kind of the sentiment that gets there, because they would say, well, let's find another way. And we're going to be dealing with a transportation bill. We keep kicking the can down the road. But I'd like to see it get to the floor, and I think it would pass on the floor from that standpoint. But at the end of the day, it's still a big issue for a lot of members in terms of adding on an additional gas tax. But it's got to get dealt with because it is a problem. We are a donor state. It's better than it was, but at the end of the day, I think at one time we were getting 80 cents on a dollar. Maybe it's 92 or something. New York, it's $1.37 because we have every time you buy a gallon of gas, it goes in a trust fund and then gets redistributed. That's another area we need to fight on, but we need to resolve that issue, and I'm pushing to get something done on that because obviously the cost of construction and the needs today in America are huge. And even when they did the stimulus bill, I always felt like if you're going to do the stimulus, instead of spending $50 million or 50 billion, millions and billions, you get confused up there. But instead of spending $50 billion on transportation, if they would have spent 90% of it on transportation, I think a lot of people would be much more open-minded. But it is a big challenge. It's something we're working on, and we're going to be debating, and we'll see what happens in the next 30 days or so, because it's something we have to deal with. We need a six-year highway bill. The other thought is just in terms of contractors and everybody else, how do you plan for the future if you don't know if the funding's going to be there or not every 6 months? So that's got to end, and we're pushing on that real hard. But thanks for the question.
Mary Ruiz, Center Stone.
Mary, good seeing you again.
Good to see you again. And, business needs a fit and ready and productive workforce. And you've been working with Congressman Murphy on mental health issues, and you've also taken a leadership in Congress on dealing with the opioid epidemic in our country. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what Congressman Murphy and you have in mind in terms of moving those issues forward.
We spend, I think, $100 billion on, you do, taxpayers do, the $3 trillion that we take in. And we haven't changed much from the way we've done business since JFK, last 50 or 60 years. So he's got a bill, a Republican. He's a doctor and psychologist. I think he's got a solid bill. We've got more and more support. We're trying to push that through. We need to do more in that space. Everybody seems to be affected one way or another. I never realized, and I brought Tim Murphy from Pennsylvania into our community to talk with a lot of experts, do town halls and other things. But, you know, it affects everybody. Everybody's got an issue, and I appreciate so much for what you do, and I know that you could use a facility 10 times greater. I mean, I just know that. And unfortunately, what's happening on our streets with our kids, and it doesn't just happen to, you know, the poor kids, it happens to every kid. And I've seen a lot of scenarios in this region where, you know, families that were very successful and they come home and find their granddaughter dead in their house. There's a lot of big issues, and then the whole thing with homeless. So I'm very passionate, trying to do what we can to move this thing forward. I think we've made good progress, but these things unfortunately take some time. And I'm hoping I'd like to think next year, but I don't know with this crazy presidential election what's going to get done in 2016, but it's at the top of my list. Tim is pushing it every day, and it is a big issue. Hey, let me say one other thing, and I forgot to mention, probably other than helping small business, my biggest issue in Washington by far. And I did it at the town hall meeting. I bring 2 charts up there. You know, I ran, everybody has a reason why they run, because people think I'm crazy that I ran in the first place, leave that lifestyle and go into this business. But I ran because I was concerned about deficit spending. You know, it wasn't just Democrats, it was Democrats and Republicans over the last 50 years. We balanced the budget 5 times. But in the last 8 years, we've averaged over $1 trillion a year in deficit spending. It was $8 trillion when I got there. It's almost $19 trillion. That brings instability. Anybody that's been in business or been around leveraged transactions or anything else, debt can work for a period of time, you know, as long as everything stays kind of on that cycle. But the fact of the matter is, we have brought it down to about $400 billion, but my first week I got in Congress, and every new Congress I introduced a balanced budget amendment. I think it's 49 out of 50 governors. We shouldn't spend more than we take in. I think personally it's immoral. I think what we're doing to our kids and our grandkids, many of us in this room will probably be fine, but you can't continue to spend the way we have. This administration, since I came in, they'll average over $1 trillion a year of deficit spending. You can't pay back $1 trillion, it's 1,000 billions. So we're almost at, when you look at it, and that's why historically people say about interest rates. I'd say, how can they raise interest rates? 1 point on 20 billion, on 20 trillion is 200 billion. How do you raise interest rates in that environment? And we get away with it because we're still the best currency in the world. When you look at what's going on in Europe and the Japanese and the Chinese, no transparency, and those economies are flat. But that's still by far my biggest issue. And you say, well, does that make sense, Vern? Well, 49 out of 50 governors have a balanced budget amendment. You can't do it in Manatee County or in Bradenton or any other community. You can't continue to spend money you don't have. So that's why, and we did get it on the floor for a vote, came up a few votes short. It just makes common sense. This year we'll take in a record amount of tax revenues from you guys and others, $3 trillion. But we still overspent at $3.5 trillion. And the last couple of years, we've taken 2.7, 2.8. We're spending 3.7 trillion, over $1 trillion each year. So it's mind-boggling. Nobody would ever run their business that way. You couldn't get away with it. But it is my top priority. That, and also, if you look at the economy, we're growing at 2%. If we had the right leadership in Washington, I look at Europe's flat, Japan's flat, there's no transparency in China. We've seen the hiccups here lately. If we had the right leadership that was focused on doing more business and helping business people do more business, and you got to 3.5%, you would solve a lot of these issues, a lot of issues for funding, a lot of other things. But it takes someone that's a pro-growth president, pro-growth administration, a pro-growth Congress, and that's something that should be able to get done, and it's something that I continue to fight for. So my 2 biggest issue is finding a way to grow the economy and focus on that, and then deal with our deficits and not spend more of the money, ideally, than we take in and move towards a balanced budget amendment, because I don't believe them. I just don't believe anybody up there. that continues to spend the kind of money that they do, and they come up with all these reasons and rationale. Now, if you have a war or something, maybe you got to step up and do some deficit spending, but not the way we're just doing business where we've averaged over $1 trillion a year. It's immoral. It's unacceptable. Something I fight for every day. And that's why sometimes I think about, well, maybe I'll go do something else. But then I think about what are we going to leave our kids and grandkids, and I'm in a position where I can weigh in, and I think in a big way with a lot of these people, try to bring some common sense. But that is by far my biggest issue. Commissioner.
Congressman, on behalf of Manatee County, I want to thank you for your efforts. You have done a great job to focus on the things that are important to our community, jobs. But I did want to follow up on Bob's question, and I hear you talk about funding and how we need to get funding, because so many people come to us and tell us that we need new programs, we need transportation, we need all these things. And I would like to say to them, well, then tell me how we're going to pay for them. What are you willing to support? And we have 15th Street East, which is a big project for us locally. Old US 301, and it's something I know that we all went to Washington and talked to you about. As a cyclist, it has an opportunity to be a multimodal road, help us do real redevelopment in our urban core. And so how do we bring support? How can we help get focused on this need for transportation funding? What can we do to try to help move this forward? Because we're not going to be able to have the infrastructure that we need to support our growth, to support what is going to cause economic development, unless we have a way to bring funding to this state and this community. So I just wondered if there's any ideas that you have there where we could help you to try to see how we can get funding moving forward.
That's a good point. Let me just mention one thing. And this is the biggest challenge with spending. Mandatory spending, I think 20 years ago, was a third of the budget, maybe 30 years ago. A third of the total dollars. Today, mandatory spending is 2/3. So there's a much smaller piece of that pie. That, in mandatory spending, is not national defense, which is $700 billion. But when you look at, and I'll touch on transportation, but when you look at the spending that we've got, health care, of the $3 trillion I told you we took in, do you know what health care is a year? What we spend on health care alone? Over $1 trillion. You say, Vern, how could you spend over $1 trillion of federal government on health care? $550 billion for Medicare, $250 billion our match on Medicaid, 3 million employees, their health care insurance. Then you have all the veterans and others that have earned their health care insurance. You got then the demographics today. You got 10 to 12,000 people turning 65 every day for the next 30 years. And they're living longer. My brother moved to Venice. And he said to me, he said, Vern, these people down here are unbelievable. He said, he's a year younger than me. He said, what do you mean? They go out and they play. A guy the other day, 77 years old, my brother, he goes out and plays 18 holes of golf and then rides his bike for 20 miles. And it's not that unusual. But getting back to people living longer and everything, getting back to the whole thing on transportation, we really need to educate people. Everybody says the same thing. If we got to the House floor, I think it passes. But everybody says the same thing. Yes, we want more of this. We want more bike trails, which I'm big on. I think it's a huge opportunity for Manatee and Sarasota County to invest there. We want more infrastructure. But then when you ask them, are you willing to pay for it? And we can't find a better vehicle than, back to your point, Bob. I mean, if there's another way, fees or something, private-public partnerships, if we could do that, let's do it. But we can't find a better way at this point. Nobody's got a better way of paying for it other than adding something to the gas tax. But then people, when you ask them for their support, they said, no, I don't want to pay more on my gas tax. You don't need more tax. You guys waste too much money up there. Get rid of the fraud and abuse and everything else, then come back and talk to me. So it's a matter of really educating a lot of people. We're going to have to make some tough decisions up there because we don't have the funding for a long term, which we should have. The highway bills and highway projects can run 3, 4, 5 years on big projects, interstates and other things. We need a permanent solution to the funding, and that's going to have to be heavily debated, hopefully, in the next 30 to 60 days. You just can't get by without, funding it properly. And if there's another way, then we'll take a look at it. I do know, and I know a lot of people don't like this, but I do know when I lived in Tampa for a while, they built the Veterans Freeway up there next to where the mall is now, and it's towed, but nobody likes that. But, that might be something where you raise the money or part of the money, and then you go do things like that. Or we might have to, as a state, we might have to step up, and right now money's free, and lock that money down and be able to do things. But it's got to get dealt with. You can't deal with it after the problem, and because otherwise it ends up costing you a lot more money. So it's not an easy answer. I'll have a better answer probably in 30 or 60 days. I hope we have the courage to step up and do what needs to be done. And of course, there's a lot of things. I mentioned the whole thing on entitlements. I was at a little story. I go to some of these assisted living facilities we have in the area. These people are, they vote, they're active, they're engaged, and I get invited to come down, give them a little quick update or really take their comments or question. A lot of them are pretty sharp. So I was in Sarasota, I'm at a facility, so I get ready to walk in a room, and the woman grabs my arm and said, "Vern, can you come over and talk to Mabel?" I said, "Sure." And so we're running a little late, and so I go over and talk to her, very sharp, very coherent. And so I was listening to her for about 10, 15 minutes, and she's telling me about her great-grandkids and all that. So then I get ready to walk, said, "Well, you need to ask her how old she is." I said, "I'm not asking a woman her age." I've been in that trap before. I'm not. She said, no, she likes to give out her age. True story, you can't make this up. So I said, "Well, they're putting me on the spot. What do you think?" She says, "I'm 108. And I said, "I got to ask you, what's the key to your longevity?" Because I said she was spry, walking up and in. She said, "I've got a boyfriend." And I said, "Oh, you like younger men, huh?" She said, "Well, he's not that much younger." I said, "How old is he?" She said, "He's 102. And she said, "Our birthdays are on the same day." So it was a true story. And but my point is, that's one of the big challenges. In my congressional district, half of the people are 55 and older. 750,000 we today roughly represent. They vote. So one of the big challenges we've got is entitlements going forward, as I said, on the mandatory side. How do you deal with that? You think transportation's tough? When you start screwing around with Medicare and Social Security in Florida, in this region, it's a good way to get fired quickly. So these are tough issues. They've got to be dealt with on a bipartisan basis, and you got to be up there and do what's right. I guess I've got time for one more question or so.
Congressman, how are you this morning?
Oh, great. Good to see you, Commissioner.
I want to thank you first for not voting for the Iran deal. You read the papers, and of course we hear from residents all the time on different issues going on. A big one right now, of course, is the Iran deal. But the one thing I do want you to know is that even though so many people in Manatee that we hear from are very upset with the Republicans right now in Washington, you do seem to prevail, and they still look up to you and admire you. Can you tell us, give us an idea of what it must be like, what you are trying to deal with in, as you put it, the logic, trying to have people to have common sense in Washington right now, and how do you deal with that and trying to get things done?
Well, I think the big thing is you just try to find bipartisan scenarios, opportunities, like I did with the Veterans ID card. You try to find things that you can get agreement on, like I've done as part of our delegation in Florida. But, the people are right. It's dysfunctional. And the reason it's dysfunctional, because I'll take a look at our body, our institution. We have 45 people that won't work with the others. If you don't have 218, you can't get to the votes. And then you say, well, how do they have that much power, 40 over the 180? Because they have the ability to take down, not to be technical, take down the rule. You can't get to the bill that you're trying to pass. So they hold up everybody else. On the other side, in the Senate, You can get some things on budgeting. I'm on the budget committee. You can get some things done through reconciliation, 51 votes, but you need, the Senate rules, you need 60 votes to get anything done. That's what happened on the Rand deal. They wouldn't even bring it up, which I think is disgraceful. They wouldn't even bring it up for discussion or debate and then, or vote on it. They chickened out. So then you have, of course, a president that sees the world differently than we do. The battle in Washington is, you've got one party, in my sense, that is more, they want more spending, more taxes, more government. Government's the answer. We want the opposite. And you've got, more people that are, because of gerrymandering, that are more to the far left, and you got more people to the far right, and it's hard to find people in the middle that are willing to sit down and work out something. So that's the battle we're in. Madison put all this together. It's a system that they didn't want anything to pass. So now we got a House technically we control, but we got to figure out how to manage that. Then you got a Senate you got to get the 60 votes on. So you can't get much done there unless you get the 60 votes, unless it's bipartisan. Then you have a president, that can veto things. So that's the scenario you're in. And that's why it makes it so difficult when you see the world differently. The country's very divided. But all that being said, I'll be very candid about it. I was in a retreat and with Republicans. And they were talking about what we could get done the next year, next 2 years, and next 4 years. 5 members in front of me, then it came to me. They said, we can't work with this president. We're not going to be able to get anything done until he gets out of office. So it came to me, and it was the beginning of this year, and I said, no, that's not the attitude I'm taking. We need to find ways we can get some things done. I know that he has a different vision, but I'm not going to write off this year and next year and get absolutely nothing done. So that's kind of what I try to do. I will stand in the gap, do what I think is right. I don't like the partisanship. When you're, again, I get back to business people. That's why a lot of people just can't, are very upset about it. There's a lot of, when you look at it, because a business person looks at, it's not about parties, it's about the best interest of the enterprise. The best interest of the enterprise, to me, is America. So why can't we sit down and get some of these things? We could solve 90% of the problems. I could take this table, that table in America. But they don't have the courage, in my mind, to sit down and deal with these tough issues. And we have some tough issues. Transportation, entitlements. A lot of these things are tough issues that we've got to deal with. We've got to do it. And if it means losing your job doing it, you do it. But that's the attitude I try to bring to it. And I'm hopeful, maybe after this next election, frankly, that a lot of this stuff might change. And but we really do need new leadership in Washington. Thank you, and God bless.
So inspiring. Thank you so much, Congressman. Would like to introduce a good friend to the Manatee Chamber of Commerce next to pass along the reward that we're here for this morning. Moore Hallmark. Who cannot smile when they hear the last name Hallmark? Moore is the Executive Director for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for the Southeast region, especially in the Congressional and Public Affairs area. So, Mr. Hallmark.
Thanks, Jonathan. And Bob, thank you for the invitation and opportunity to be here today. Congressman, I will echo what you're saying. This is indeed one of the best chambers around, not only in the state of Florida, but around the country. And I'll take this opportunity just to mention the fact that this is a 5-star accredited chamber, the highest designation a chamber can receive for the United States and chambers, and one of probably less than 100 chambers that have reached this designation of a 5-star accredited chamber, which, when you think about it, there are more than 7,000 chambers in the United States, and you're one of 100. It's a pretty impressive group. So, Bob, congratulations. It's indeed a testament to Bob's leadership and the entire chamber staff, but also to Jonathan and the volunteer leadership of this chamber for the vision you've taken in that process. And so, congratulations again. Well, it is indeed a pleasure and opportunity, a pleasure for me to be here to recognize a friend of mine as well, but a friend of the entire business community, and that's Congressman Vern Buchanan. Each year, the U.S. Chamber polls the American business community to find out what are the most important issues to you on a day-to-day basis, and then we evaluate the members of Congress on how they vote on those issues. For the members of Congress who vote 70% or greater in that given year of Congress receives the Chamber's coveted Spirit of Prize Award. For the last year, for the second session of the 113th Congress, the U.S. Chamber designated just 14 votes. 14 out of the hundreds taken on the House floor are some of the most important votes. Some of those issues included issues like transportation, trade, energy development, tax reform, and regulatory reform. Well, I'm proud to tell you that obviously the Congressman once again received the award, as he has every year he's been in Congress, and now has a voting record of 88% for his entire time in Congress. So, Congressman, on behalf of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Manatee Chamber of Commerce, and their friends and your friends here today, it is my pleasure to present you with the Spirit of Enterprise Award. Thank you for your continued leadership in Washington. Appreciate it.
Here you go, Gary.
Congratulations. Before we adjourn, I would like to extend a few more thanks for a second time. If Violetta Husband and Jackie Barron can please just stand for just a moment, be recognized. They were our sponsors with Kaiser University and the Mosaic Company. And then also recognize all of the platinum members of the Manatee Chamber for all of their support. My firm, Blaylock Walters, is a proud platinum member because it's our chamber here locally that gets behind Congressman Buchanan and other important initiatives to keep the great American business pride going and the economic engine going that we need. So with that, we will adjourn. God bless America. Thank you so much for coming.